We have alleged that the blue team, which is my term for it, because I don't like calling it the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is something that has had an honorable role in history. I just think something's happened to it, and that's now not what the thing is. It's behaving as something very differently and treating it. It is like the family dog. Sorry, the family dog has gotten rabies. Right, and the point is thinking of the family dog once it's got rabies as the family dog is the wrong way to think about it. That dog is now a serious problem, and so anyway, the idea that the blue team is some new type of force is important, and it's something we've discussed, and we will come back to it in a second. I also wanted to bring back up a concept that I heard described very well by Peter Thiel. I don't know if it's his concept originally or not. It was just in a speech that he recently gave. But he talked about there being two purposes for money. And I thought this was a very useful dichotomy. And the one purpose he described was as a means for exchange, which is to say you have some money and you can use it to buy things. And money still works well in this way. But then there's this other way in which money functions as a store of wealth, especially dollars, the world's reserve currency, right? And the idea is that a dollar, even though it is a fiat currency that basically has value because we assert that it has value, not because, a paper dollar doesn't have any intrinsic value, much less a decimal point on a screen. But nonetheless, because of the durability of the United States, its currency is the world's reserve currency and has been so for many, many decades. And so anyway, money functions as a store of wealth, right? One thing you can do if you have wealth is you can put it into dollars, and those dollars fluctuate in terms of how much they're worth. But the point is there's some stability to it. And in fact, other countries have sometimes pegged their currencies to the dollar because of that stable value. And what I'm increasingly realizing is that second, you would imagine that if that second feature of money were to disintegrate, that it would take the first one with it. And this is less true than you would imagine. This is one of the curious things about the present, is there is every reason to imagine that in fact the store of wealth is failing to function as a store of wealth, that there's a great deal of uncertainty about the value of the dollar going forward, in large measure because we have basically printed dollars as a way of getting out of crises, and that's a very limited phenomenon. But the store of wealth is ever more suspect. And yet we're still using this object as a means of exchange, in part because something like crypto never figured out how to be easy to use. Right? Crypto was so hard to pay anybody with crypto that
crypto worked as a store of wealth, but not as an exchange.
Yes, exactly, as an exchange modality.
Yeah.
Now the funny thing is, it never really worked all that well as a store of wealth either, because it was so volatile, right? True. And we have seen,
But it worked better in that modality, in your telling of it, in Thiel's second modality than in the first.
Yeah. It never worked as a modality of exchange because in part, and this is going to get to the FTX part of the story here, in part because in order to use it, you had to go through an exchange to get to dollars and use those for exchange. So it, it was at best a redundant and complexifying feature of the environment. Okay. But I want to call attention to something that I think I haven't really described here yet, and it's something I suspect is playing a hugely important role in history at the moment. And I'm just going to lay it out, and you help me get it to clarity.
Okay. I have not heard this yet.
What I call it the time-traveling money printer. Okay, which I know is not a name that calls anything meaningful to mind yet, but you'll see why in a second. Nope.
Time-traveling money printer.
Everybody has gone through the thought exercise of what would you do if you had a time machine, right? And almost no matter what your values are, you come up with some version of, well, if I've got a time machine that goes forward, I could go and I could look at stock prices a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, figure out what was going to go up, and then I could come back in time and buy some of that, figure out what was going to go down. I could short that. And so you could create a big pile of wealth if you had a time machine. Likewise, if you can go backwards in time, you can go buy some Microsoft or Apple when they're nice and cheap, and you could become super wealthy by doing this, right? Now, what I'm concerned about is that there's actually a class of elites that now effectively has a time machine. And it doesn't have time travel in the technical sense, but it has another mechanism of doing the same thing, and it has implications, therefore, for the value of something like $1. Because if somebody is capable of effectively printing money of their own without risking being arrested for counterfeiting, for example, then the point is they are robbing everybody who holds dollars, because there are more dollars in circulation, so every dollar is worth less, right? So here's my claim. If you have effectively insight on what is going to happen, historically speaking, and you share it, then everybody quickly picks up that insight, and the markets will correct for whatever's going to happen, right? They will build that into the price of whatever it is that you're looking at. If, on the other hand, you have information about what's going to happen historically and others don't have it, then you uniquely can position yourselves for the change that is coming, create huge piles of wealth based on what is effectively inside information, and thereby rob everybody else who is using this place to store their own wealth. And so let's take one example that I think has become somewhat obvious. There is strong evidence that COVID was circulating long before we in the public became aware of it. We became aware of it effectively at the new year of 2020, right?
Tail end of January was the earliest for almost everyone.
Tail end of January was the earliest for virtually everyone.
So you're a month early already. It was March before, sort of widely understood. Many people were aware in February. Tail end of January is when, for instance, we became aware of it. I don't think in the new year more than a handful of...
Almost doesn't matter, because let's put it this way.
2020 you're talking.
If you are looking at information that's public, and you put two and two together and you say there's something circulating and it could affect the world, and other people are slow to realize it, that's legitimate. That's insight that's driving it. On the other hand, there's strong evidence that the virus was circulating at the Wuhan military games in September of 2019.
September, October.
I think it was September, but it doesn't matter. The point is, long before the public got any warning that there might be something worth paying attention to in this space. Now, here's the question. Who knew? Right? If nobody knew, if it was circulating and it just didn't dawn on anybody to test for it or figure out that there was a pattern, okay, then we're all in the same place. If, on the other hand, certain people knew what was coming, and instead of sharing that information publicly, what they did was position themselves so that predictable things would cause them to become wealthy. You can short stocks for, let's say, cruise ships, which are going to take a terrible hit, right? You could see some things that would obviously be elevated. You might know who had, viable vaccine technologies that might become quickly relevant. Who's to say? But the point is, if you had inside information in September, October of 2019 that there was a great contagious disease that was going to spread as a pandemic, you might well be in a wonderful position to effectively print money. And the key to it is you can't move in time, but you can slow other people down in terms of how quickly they realize what's coming, so that by the time they are saying, hey, maybe cruise ships are going to take a hit, the point is you've already shorted that stock, right? So the basic point is, well, is there a game afoot in which, instead of trying to read the tea leaves better, instead of using expertise to figure out which things are undervalued and to arbitrage those markets, that instead the game is to delay the dawning of insight on the public and turn them into a never-ending sea of what would, in economic terms, be called greater fools, right? And if that happens, right, if it happens once, then the point is you'll see a fortune created and it will rob everybody else to a small degree. But if it becomes systematic, right, then it raises the question of, well, then what are dollars, right? If somebody is able to make dollars when they want to by being ahead of everybody else because they know what's coming, why are they ahead of everybody else? Because they slow them down in the recognition of these patterns. And the point is, well, that's not a store of wealth from the point of view of most people. That's a scheme in which some people make great fortunes and others slowly have their wealth drained away.
Right. So slowing down the awareness of people can look a lot of ways. And I think you're going to go to a couple of these places, but is that where you're going next?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
This is why I think we are fighting over what kind of place Twitter is going to be, for example, right? So the idea is, if we in the public have a place in which to do some truth seeking, if universities still function to seek truth, if journalists are still pursuing truth, right, then we have mechanisms that we can use to figure out what's coming too. If we can hobble those institutions, right? And so the point is, well, what is the newspaper you would go to figure out just the basic facts of what's taking place so you could begin to build a model of your own? If we don't have that, because there is no newspaper that isn't a partisan rag at this point, right? If we don't have scientists who will tell us the truth of some important economically relevant field, what we have is people spreading narratives, then the point is, well, that creates a landscape in which this game can unfold again and again. And so viewers of DarkHorse will be well familiar with the idea that 0 is a special number. And this is really, I'm arguing, this is at least one good reason why 0 is so special, is that it creates that a landscape in which wealth can be drained away from most people who have stored it in things like dollars to those who have a privileged position as a result of the fact that sense-making has now it has descended into noise.